Welcome back to On the Move with Victor Shi. It is Thursday, April 20th. I heard so many people come to me disappointed about the Dominion settlement with Fox, and I admit I was also disappointed about the Dominion settlement. I thought it would have been powerful to let the process play out in court, but as unfortunate as it was for Dominion to may have settled, it's also important for all of us to know that Dominion got what it wanted as a business, and that was money, and some pretty good money too. So the question that I have is that if Dominion won by getting good money, what about Fox? How badly does this affect Fox, and will it change what they do? Well, I'm joined by someone who knows more about this business and also the media than most, and she is the amazing and incredible Stephanie Ruhle, who is the chief economic correspondent for NBC and host of the 11th Hour on MSNBC, and is the first person who I turn to when, let's say, a bank collapses or I need someone to help me explain the economy. Stephanie, it's so great to see you and to get the chance to interview you, which is something I know probably doesn't happen too often.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. So let's start off by talking about this Dominion lawsuit and settlement, because I'll admit, I overlook the fact that Dominion is a corporation and that at the end of the day, what matters most to corporations is money. So can you walk us through, from a business perspective, why you think Dominion settled this case with Fox?
So I wouldn't say that corporations are just here for money, but it's a business. And
Yeah.
this was a business litigation. And in business litigations, they are suing for a sum of money, right? And that's exactly what happened here. And while people could look at it at first and say, but it was supposed to be 1.6 billion, they got $787.5 million. And what's important to remember is they're going to get that now by settling. If this went to a trial, obviously, all sorts of Americans were hoping to learn lots of details that we hadn't heard yet. First, there's a good chance we heard most of everything already, but a full trial is a crapshoot. It's a gamble. You don't know what the outcome is going to be. And even if this went to a full trial and Dominion won, there would be appeals, and it could be potentially years before then they got any dollars in hand. And remember, for Dominion and for the investment firm that owns them, this was a huge, massive, very expensive undertaking. And so they wouldn't be acting as a fiduciary. It wouldn't be responsible for them to not take a settlement like this. And for their investor, remember, they have an investor behind them. Their investor, according to Puck News, invested something like $38 million. That was it.
Wow.
They own 76% of the company. They're going to get over $600 million. And this isn't their only lawsuit, right? They are suing some people connected to Fox. There are other things around that. And now one could say, yeah, but look at how much money Fox has on hand. And they do. Right at the end of 2022, they had over $4 billion in free cash. They could just write this check. But what this settlement symbolizes is the fact that they're willing to settle, and the floodgates could be opening for defamation suits behind it. Just yesterday, we heard from the lawyer from Smartmatic, the other voting machine company that is suing Fox News next, and they're suing Fox for more. They're suing Fox for $2.6 billion. And their lawyer said, we're going to pick up where Dominion left off. And that case is going to be in New York. There's going to have to be a jury selected. Those are two things, that are not favorable for Fox. And it's in a state where there's no cap on punitive damages. So the sky's the limit.
Wow. Well, I mean, when you look at this from Fox's perspective, you mentioned they earned $4 billion in 2022. I'm wondering, how big of a dent do you think these two lawsuits would do to their bottom line? And if it's not going to do a lot, what do you think will get them to change, if at all?
Listen, I definitely can't opine on what would get them to change. But listen, it was a business decision in that they saw when the Arizona election was accurately called, their viewers fled. They went to OAN, they went to Newsmax, and Fox made a decision that we are going to provide content that our viewers want to watch. Now, you and I could argue, but that's not honest. That's not true. That's what so that's what they made a decision to do. Now, what is the physical number? What is the literal number that would make Fox change its ways? I can't answer that.
So I want to ask you about who you think won, because there's been a lot of debate about who lost, who won in this settlement. Who do you think is the victor, and who do you think lost in this case, if there is a loser at all?
It's really clear. Dominion won. Fox News, we can't discount. This is the largest settlement in U.S. history for a media defamation lawsuit like this, right? It's enormous. And
Yeah.
while people might be angry saying we needed an apology, yes, on some level, there it would be great if in fact Fox, and they didn't, if in fact Fox admitted that they lied and
Yeah.
went on television and said to their viewers, we misrepresented X, Y, and Z. However, I give you other examples. Think about all the times when there's wrongdoing on the part of a company. It could be Southwest Airline or Norfolk Southern, and they get up, or when you see CEOs go to their hearings on the Hill and they say, I'm sorry, we're going to do better next time.
Yeah.
What we often hear the public say is, I'm sorry is not enough. Those are just words. Probably had your fingers crossed behind your back. We want to see consequences. Well, I am pretty sure almost $800 million in a settlement is a big old consequence, and they're paying that right now.
And just like you said, this is not the end of the lawsuits that they face. But I want to shift to the economy because there's a huge battle right now on Capitol Hill over the debt ceiling. President Biden released his economic package a few weeks ago, and yesterday, Kevin McCarthy released his plan for the debt ceiling. Can you walk us through what we should know about Kevin McCarthy's plan and what it would do to the economy if enacted?
Listen, I think we're premature to be going into what exactly is in Kevin McCarthy's plan. I think the most important thing is, does Kevin McCarthy even have the votes within his own caucus, right? Because what the American people need to understand, if the U.S. defaulted, it would be economically disastrous for us. And I think the scary thing is, in this quote unquote game of chicken, we've seen this before in terms of these standoffs, but we have not seen the faction of the Republican Party, the Marjorie Taylor Greene faction, who truly has the devil may care, let us fall off the cliff. So what if we default? And I've spoken to a number of lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, off the record, or on background, who are concerned that there's a portion of the Republican Party in Congress who's saying, let's just fall off the cliff. And I don't think I'm speaking out of school. A number of them don't understand basic economics, and this would hurt so many elements of our economy. It's one of the reasons why you'd see Kevin McCarthy speaking on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, because it's Wall Street that's starting to panic, saying, they haven't yet, because they've been like, oh, this is going to be fine. This is going to be fine. How Kevin McCarthy is going to wrangle his party. And while the White House is saying, listen, there's nothing to negotiate. This is not the budget. The budget was already passed. They also don't have the easiest hand to play, because we could say come June, this was the Republicans that did it. This was Republicans' fault. You know this as well as I do. You've spoken to voters across the country. People don't get into it that deeply. Right? They're just going to say, who's the current president? What's happening in my life economically? And so the White House does have to thread a very complicated needle.
I mean, perception trumps reality. And just like you said, the question that I should have asked is, do you think Kevin McCarthy even has the vote for this bill as of now?
I don't know firsthand. It doesn't seem like he does. And then, of course, it has to go to the Senate. But Mitch McConnell, who, is now back, his health seems to be better, is being quite silent, sitting there with his arms crossed. But I've been thinking over the last 6 weeks, I know. I mean, there are so many massive GOP donors, Republican, wealthy, New York, Palm Beach donors, Mitch McConnell donors, who have to be ringing his phone off the hook, saying, what is going to happen here? Like, are you going to wrangle this in? And it's not Mitch's to wrangle, it's Kevin's. And Mitch is kind of sitting here saying, it's your move, buddy.
Right. So, I don't try to be an economist, but I hear for a lot of things from the right about how committed they are to the economy and wanting to solve inflation. Second, how this economy is under free fall under President Biden. I'm wondering, are any of those things true? And give us a kind of sense of what the state of our economy is. I saw you last night, 11th hour, and you were talking about your concern of interest rates. Are there any things that we should be concerned about? And what is kind of the situation with our economy right now?
We are without a doubt in economic recovery, right? Things that you have to always remember where we were in sort of the depths of COVID. And unfortunately, we then got hit with the war in Ukraine, which impacted things. It impacted the supply chain, and it hasn't been the cleanest, easiest recovery. And in raising interest rates, there are consequences, right? Silicon Valley Bank and its collapse was connected to lots of bad decisions that the bank made, but they made them based on it was directly connected to interest rates. And something I was mentioning last night that's a concern, that could be sort of this canary in the coal mine, is what we're seeing happen in the commercial real estate market. And again, you're going to go, why does that affect me? Why do I care? But you have to look at all these things floating around saying, should I be paying attention to this? And what we're actually seeing happen in the last week, one of the biggest commercial real estate firms, right, property developers, Brookfield Management, they're based here in New York, defaulted on a loan to a bank that's almost $200 million. And that's scary. Why would that happen? Well, think about it. We have got all of this commercial real estate, office buildings in cities across the country that are basically sitting empty or partially full because so many businesses still have employees working from home and they need a smaller footprint. So you've got office buildings sitting empty or partially filled. Their mortgage, it's time for them to refinance. And when they step into refinance, rates are so much higher. They can't afford it. And they're actually saying to the banks, you know what? Take the keys. I'm going to default. And if we start to see this in a bigger and bigger way, in the last few years, a lot of smaller banks that are already in a fragile position have been the lenders. And now people are saying, I remember after I talked about this on air last night, people are all over my Twitter saying, why are you being so black and white? It's the perfect time to repurpose these buildings and make them low income housing. And sure, that's great. That's all well and good. That doesn't happen overnight, right? That takes years. That takes rezoning. That takes new permits. That takes the will and the money to do it. And you're not necessarily going to see these property managers, these commercial real estate firms saying, oh, no big deal. XYZ company is moving out. I'm going to just make this low income housing. It doesn't happen with the snap of a fingers. And so I would say we are absolutely in an economic recovery. We have seen inflation slow, which is a positive. And with the labor market being as tight as it is, we actually have some cushion. And while you don't ever want to hear about layoffs anywhere, our economy can withstand that, right? We have the ability, given how low unemployment is. So I would say we're in an economic recovery. That's very good news. However, it is fragile. And the impact of higher rates, it's like an earthquake happening out in the ocean, it takes a few days, but it makes its way in, to land eventually. And that's one of the things we're seeing when you look what's happening in the real estate market.
And just a few weeks ago, you were on basically every show on MSNBC talking about the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. And I mean, do you think that was based off of what we know right now with also raising interest rates, that could be just a one-off event? Or how concerned should we be that more banks might collapse if this happens?
Listen, we saw Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank and some of these smaller banks really in a difficult position. Silicon Valley Bank made really bad choices. Right. And what that was, it was not a banking crisis. It was a crisis of confidence. Right. Yeah. They suddenly, they made bad decisions with the cash they had. They suddenly had a hole. They informed their customers. Their customers overnight pulled their money out. And remember, the banking system is 100% based on trust. You're the bank. I'm going to give you my money. You can take that money and lend it out and reinvest it and do little things with it. But when I want it back, you will give it back to me. That is the contract we enter into. Now, the government stepped in, and it wasn't a bailout in terms of the bank being rescued, right? The equity is worth zero. Like the bank got wiped out, but the depositors were protected. And the government has made it clear, dear American depositor, your deposits are safe, right? Normally, the FDIC insures up to $250,000. And Janet Yellen has made it clear, dear U.S. depositor, your money is safe. Now, there's debates on should we raise that? Should we change that? But right now, people who simply have their money in a bank should not be concerned. Does that mean the banking system is totally fine and dandy? Absolutely not. And what I was touching on before in commercial real estate, you've got a lot of these smaller banks as the lender to these commercial real estate firms. And they're not going to be in a position to suddenly take on owning a whole bunch of office buildings around the country that they're getting paid little to no rent on.
Well, thank you for shedding a light on that. And I know we'll all be paying attention to that story as it develops. But I have one last question for you, which is, given that the show is geared for young people and you've had such an interesting career path, what would you say to young people who are thinking about getting their career started in, say, business or the media?
Work hard. Just work hard. That's it. It doesn't matter what your first job is. It doesn't matter what your goal is that you want to climb the ladder to, I want you to climb the ladder. I've had the benefit of climbing the ladder, but the only way to safely and securely climb the ladder is that if every rung that you're standing on is secure and you've mastered it, right?
Yeah.
And not to dampen the entrepreneurial spirit, I think that's great, but before you're going to run, walk, right? I don't want you, I want you to slowly climb the ladder in terms of build that foundation, right? Build that foundation, learn all the skills that you need to learn, master the job that you're in before you get on to the next and the next and the next. I want people to succeed and soar, but I can tell you, as someone who I think in my career in banking moved up the ladder too quickly, I was so focused on my success and the next achievement and the next achievement. I think I read too many Cliff's Notes and not the long edition.
Yeah.
And I think that there are lots of examples where throughout my career in banking and then in TV, because I didn't get into TV until I was 36. I was in such a rush to get to the next place. And there is nothing stronger or better than having built a great foundation.
Absolutely. Stephanie Ruhle, thank you so much for all that you do. And thank you so much for joining me this morning. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks so much. Well, Stephanie is always on fire. I have been on her show a couple of times, and so it was a really delightful treat for me to be able to interview her. And I think just what she said about the economy is something that, I think not enough people pay attention to. Just like she said, most Americans don't really read that far into things when it comes to the economy, but they feel it. And that's what matters. And this perception really trumps reality, even if it isn't, say, President Biden who ends up passing this deal package. But it is something that we should all pay attention to. Stephanie does such a great job of shining a light on these issues. Just a couple of things I want to get into before I let you all go today. Right before you went on air, there was an interesting development with the CEO of My Pillow, who, as some of you might know, is Mike Lindell. Basically, a couple of months ago, he challenged someone to basically debunk his 2020 election lies, and he said that he would pay that person $5 million if he did so. And this morning, a arbitration panel ordered Mike Lindell to pay that $5 million to that person who he challenged to debunk his 2020 election claims, which made me laugh a little bit. I mean, these are the things that you cannot make up. It's really quite hysterical. And just as a reminder, Mike Lindell is someone who faces lawsuits from both Smartmatic and Dominion for his 2020 election lies and spreading dangerous things about the 2020 election. So it's like this man might be going bankrupt soon. And it seems like there's some things coming his way that, you or I do not have to experience, thankfully. But this morning, Mike Lindell has now been ordered to pay $5 million to that person who he challenged. And of course, this was probably expected because his election claims have no basis whatsoever. And for anyone who tries to challenge the 2020 election, know that Joe Biden won fair and square, and there's no data that suggests that the election was stolen from Trump. So I'm glad that this person is getting the $5 million for his service to the country and for debunking Mike Lindell. And I'm glad Mike Lindell has his day of accountability. And like we said on this show, there are many, many more coming their way, including Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, OAN, Newsmax. All of these organizations are under really, I think they're going to get their feet held to the fire with these lawsuits. So we'll all be paying attention to that. One other thing that I saw this morning right before we went on air is that Republicans have now passed in the House, at least, and this probably will not pass the Senate, but in the House, at least, the House has voted to ban transgender athletes in girls' sports. And it was a vote of 219 to 203. No Democrat voted for this. No Republican voted against this. There were some no votes present, but this bill has now passed. And this is literally how this government is spending your and my taxpayer money, which is they're trying to ban transgender athletes rather than actually pass things that matter. I mean, they're focusing on such a small issue in our in our nation right now. They're trying to target the transgender community. They're trying to blame the transgender community for mass shootings. The reality is that the transgender community in the U.S. is very, very small. It's even smaller, minuscule for for mass shootings. And so for them to target this community, it feels like they're really waging a war on young people. And this is something that young people see specifically. After all, it's in girls' sports. This is something that's going to affect high schoolers and anyone who does identify with the transgender community. And it's just something that I think Republicans are really showing their true colors. The fact that no Republicans voted against this is really just a shame. And that Republicans all across the country are trying to make the lives of the LGBTQ plus community as well as the transgender community in danger. And we feel this is something that our generation feels more than ever before. And so just know that we will not let them forget this vote. I think every American should pay attention to this, even though it doesn't pass the Senate, even though it probably won't pass the Senate. This is what the House Republicans are doing. And I think it's up to all of us to pay attention to this and know that why are they spending their time targeting something so minuscule and so small in this country when they could be doing much more. I mean, their priorities are messed up, and this is what we are sending our taxpayer money to do. So that was one piece of news I saw this morning right before we went on air. And just one last thing I saw yesterday. Democrats really, I think, are best on committee hearings. Yesterday, we saw people like Representative Swalwell, Representative Golden really showed kind of and highlight the strength that the Democratic Party brings when they are prepared, when they come with receipts, when they aren't afraid to point out hypocrisy and lies. That's when I think we're at our best and we can beat Republicans at their game. And so I think if there's a lesson for every Democrat out there, take off the gloves. Don't be afraid to call out the truth and really hold Republicans to accountable, because there is, I think, a real appetite for that out there, and Americans deserve to know. And so, for example, you have Representative Goldman yesterday so cleverly shutting down Marjorie Taylor Greene just by knowing the rules. I mean, coming prepared, knowing what the rules of the committee are, and calling Republicans out when they break the rules and knowing what the consequences are. So he was able to shut Marjorie Taylor Greene down, prevent her from continuing to ask questions. You have Representative Swalwell yesterday basically bring large big postcards with her, or poster boards with him. And that's something that he's done a lot of the times. And it's so effective because he lets those things speak for themselves. And I think it's a very powerful way to bring first the audience in, but also just to highlight Republican kind of basically hypocrisy and lies, and saying that these are the words that you've said and why are you trying to say this now? And so we've just seen some tremendous action from Democrats, and this is, I think, long overdue. Democrats really learning how to get on the Republican level and beat them at their game of messaging. So good for Democrats, and just have to praise again Hakeem Jeffries for being the person who was able to get all of these representatives on these committees. It takes a leader, and it takes someone who has really good strategy and political acumen to do this. So thank you, Hakeem Jeffries, and thank you everyone for watching this show of On the Move. I hope you enjoyed it with Stephanie Ruhle. She is always great. She always helps us make sense of the economic issues of the day and put things in a little bit clearer perspective for all of us. So join us tomorrow. We'll be back at 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Eastern time, right here on youtube.com/Politicon with Kimberly Atkins Store with hashtag Sisters on MSNBC. You're not going to want to miss that. We'll talk about all the legal news of the week and what's more to come, because we are not done here. We have E. Jean Carroll. We have the Georgia lawsuit. We have Letitia James. We have January 6th, Mar-a-Lago. We are just getting started with accountability, and she'll give us an update on all of that and more. So join us tomorrow. She will be great. And again, thank you all for watching. I will see you all tomorrow at 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Eastern time, right here on youtube.com/Politicon. Have a great rest of your Thursday.